discovered that my favorite composer is Chopin. I'm currently a junior at Alexander High School in Laredo, Texas, and I'm also in band, and there I played the euphonium. So before we get started, I'd like to give my thanks to Mr. Joe Bratcher, Adams Music House, and Dr. Tobin for making all of this possible and for giving me this amazing opportunity in the first place. So this program's goal is to spread the word about lesser-known composers, and I really hope my presentation does just that about the composer I chose today, who is Moritz Moszkowski. So Moszkowski was a composer of Polish and Jewish descent. He was born in 1854 in Prussia, and the place where he was born in is now actually in Poland. He studied music at the Conservatory in Dresden, Germany, and at the Stern Conservatory in Berlin. He was an excellent pianist as well as violinist and quickly gained fame with outstanding performances across Europe. So Moszkowski mostly composed for the piano, but he also composed for the violin, the voice, the organ, and for orchestra. His compositions often consisted of long, bright, and virtuosic passages, and he was a composer in the late Romantic era. And the Romantic era lasted from 1800 to 1910. So he was born in 1854, which was right in the middle, around there. So during Moszkowski's mid-30s, he suffered from a neurological problem in his arm, which forced him to concentrate more on composing and teaching his students rather than performing around Europe. So by 1908, when Moszkowski was 54, he had suffered from a divorce, so that was very tough on him and his family, and he was going through poverty, as well as a declining career and popularity, mostly because of the neurological problem in his arm. Unfortunately, he passed away penniless in 1925 due to stomach cancer, but his legacy and genius compositions will forever live on. So actually, in this performance, you might notice that I'm going to compare a lot of my Moszkowski pieces to Frédéric Chopin's works. And this is because both composers were of Polish descent, and they were both from the Romantic era. So they had a lot of common things in their music. And Moszkowski most likely took some inspiration from Chopin.
Yeah.
So my first piece is going to be the Étincelles by Moszkowski. And étincelles actually means sparks in French, and sparks, so this piece is going to have a very sparkly and light and very much like stars of a feel to it. And the Étincelles is from Moszkowski's Opus 36, and it's his number 6 composition in Moszkowski's 8 characteristic pieces set. And this is in B-flat major in 3/8 time, so it has a very interesting time signature as well. And this Moszkowski's 8 character pieces set was first published in 1886. So as I've said before, the Étincelles has a very light and fluffy style, and it has a lot of repetition. So you will hear a lot of repeating things throughout the piece. So for example, like the melody of the piece, which sounds like this. You will hear that a lot throughout the entire piece. And Moszkowski does this for emphasis. And he also puts a lot of arpeggios and chromaticism and scales. So arpeggios will sound like this. And chromaticism sounds like this. And so on. And he does these 3 things to really show off the performer, and you will notice that Moszkowski does this a lot throughout all of his pieces. He really was a very showy person, and he liked to especially show off the performer with very fast and beautiful virtuosic passages. So because of this, it's very similar to Chopin's Black Keys Etude. Chopin also liked to put a lot of fast and virtuosic passages within his pieces too. And this is very similar to his Black Keys Etude, which sounds like this. style. So there's a lot of similarities between Moszkowski's Etudes and Chopin's Black Keys Etudes. And in Moszkowski's Etudes, there's also a lot of hand crossing, so you will notice that I'm going to do a lot of hand crossing throughout the piece. And the Etudes was also one of Horowitz's favorite pieces to play, or favorite encores to play. And if you didn't know, Horowitz was one of the best pianists of the 20th century, and he's very, very respected among the piano community. So that's a little fun fact. And this piece used to be a more popular encore in the 1950s and the 60s. Unfortunately, it's not as popular today, but hopefully it will be more popular soon. And those were just some of my thoughts on Moszkowski's Etudes in B-flat major from his Opus 36, number 6. And that was the Etudes. So my second piece by Moszkowski is going to be his C major etude from his Opus 72, number 5. And as the title suggests, it is in C major. And this etude, which means a practice piece, is in 4/4 time. So you would just count 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's a very common time signature. And this etude was the 5th etude from Moszkowski's 15 etudes. And these etudes were first published in 1903. And as I've said before, an etude is a practice piece. And these etudes are very much played by students who want to master a specific technique. And in this case, this etude focuses a lot on the C major scale. And although it is in C major, it does explore other keys and modulates to other keys as well. So An example of this is when this modulates into a G major section. So in the beginning, you would have a very simple, just C major scale, very straightforward, and it sounds like this, and so on. But in the middle of the piece, it sounds like this, and it modulates to a G major scale. And so on. So this piece is very bubbly and sparkly, just like the Ettensells, which was the first piece that I played. So it doesn't have a very heavy or a depressive mood. And this piece is, it has very simple left-hand chords in the very beginning. So as you can see, the right hand has a lot of scales and virtuosity, while the left hand is very simple. It just stays like this, and so on. So this is very much like Czerny, and Czerny is another composer who composed a lot of etudes, which are practice pieces, for his students and for the public. And it is very similar to Czerny's first etude of his School of Philosophy book, which sounds like this. And so on. So both of these are in C major, and they both have a lot of left hand just simplicity, and the right hand is very more complex, and it shows off the performer. So the right hand virtuosity in Moszkowski's C major etude and the downwards arpeggios is very similar to Mendelssohn's Rondo Capriccioso. So if you didn't know who Mendelssohn was another composer who, in the Romantic era, who composed a lot of beautiful pieces, like the Wedding March. So it's the one that everyone plays at their wedding. And this one, Moszkowski's C major etude has has some similarities with Mendelssohn's Rondo Capriccioso in the sense that the right hand has a lot of virtuosic passages, and it also has downwards arpeggios. So it goes down the scale in arpeggios, and Mendelssohn's sounds like this. And so on. While the C major etude sounds like this. And so on. And so those are some similarities between Mendelssohn's Rondo Capriccioso and Moszkowski's C major etude. So in Moszkowski's C major etude, there's a lot of, there's some compound melodies and some perpetual motion in the B major section. So compound melody just means that in both hands there are different melodies that can be played by themselves if you really wanted to. And perpetual motion just kind of means like a repetition. And you can see that in Moszkowski's B major section, which sounds like this. And so on. As you can see, the right hand has a very nice and obvious melody, while the left hand has another background melody going on, which sounds like this. And both can stand alone in their melodies, so that's why it is called a compound melody. And why is it a perpetual motion? Because it sounds, it's a lot of repetition, and you can hear the same chunk throughout the entire piece, but it's very subtle. So this is very similar to Chopin's Minute Waltz, which sounds like this. And you can hear that being repeated throughout the entire piece. And this C major etude, Moszkowski's C major etude, is very similar to Chopin's Minute Waltz in that sense, when it repeats some of its chunks. And this C major etude, although it does focus really heavily on the right hand virtuosity in the beginning, it does become a left hand etude at the end. So you have both the right hand and the left hand playing very fast scales, which sounds like this. And so on. And that was some of what Dr. Tobin and I had discussed 72, number 1. And that was Moszkowski's C major etude, from his Opus 72, number 5. And as you can see, both of the pieces that I just played were very, very fast and very show-offy, I guess you can say. So Moszkowski really, really likes to show off his performer, as I've said before. And you will find that in all of his pieces, I believe, and especially the pieces that I'm playing today. And so my next piece, my third piece, will be Moszkowski's A-flat major etude from his Opus 72, number 11. And this A-flat major etude is in 12/8 time. So that is a very interesting and unique key signature. And it is his 11th etude from his 15 etudes. And these set of etudes were first published in 1903. So this A-flat major etude, etudes, as I said before, are practice pieces, basically. So they tend to focus on one specific technique. And in this etude, Moszkowski mainly focuses on arpeggios. So in the second piece, the previous piece that I just played, it was another etude, but that one focused on a lot of scales. So this one's going to focus on arpeggios. And this is very much like Chopin's Aeolian Harp Etude, which is also in A-flat major and also has a lot of arpeggios, especially in the left hand. And it sounds like this. And so on. So this A-flat major etude actually, so Moszkowski's A-flat major etude actually sounds like this. And so on. As you can see, it has a lot of scales and arpeggios, but mainly focuses more on arpeggios. So those are some similarities between Chopin's Aeolian Harp Etude and Moszkowski's A-flat major etude. So this A-flat major etude also focuses on both the left hand and the right hand. So midway through, it becomes a left hand etude. So in the beginning, we have a lot of right hand virtuosity. It's moving very fast, while the left hand is more in the background. But in the middle, towards the middle, the left hand takes the lead with all the moving notes, and the right hand has it doesn't have background notes, but it does have a more simpler melody, which sounds like this. And so on. So unfortunately, there were some awkward places in this etude that I had struggled on, which is in its measure 3, in its very beginning, there is one measure that I kept on focusing on for every single day that I've learned this piece. I practiced hours just on that one measure, and it sounds like this. Now, it may look very effortless, or I correctly. So that was just a little fun fact thrown in there. And now back to the analysis of this piece. So there is also a lot of chromaticism in this piece, which is another way of which is another way Moszkowski was letting his his performer show off their technique. And there is also a three-note melodic line. So this three-note melodic line is in the middle section, and it is recurring throughout the entire piece, but very subtly. And you can see that in the middle section, where it's very obvious that there is a three-note melodic line. And the right hand has that melodic line, which sounds like this. And this is the melodic line. And you can find that scattered throughout the entire piece, but you would have to look and dig for it. But in Chopin's Winter Wind Etude, there is a very much more obvious melodic line, and it sounds like this. As you can see, in the beginning, the right hand has and as I go on with the beginning of the Chopin Winter Wind Etude, where the right hand kind of goes very crazy, the left hand takes the lead in the melodic line by playing this. That is a recurring theme in Chopin's Winter Wind Etude. So the similarities between Chopin's Winter Wind Etude and Moszkowski's A-flat major etude is that they both have a recurring melodic line throughout the piece, except in the Moszkowski's etude, you would have to kind of dig for it a little bit in the piece, but you will find it scattered throughout the entire piece. And those were just a few of mine and Dr. Tobin's thoughts on Moszkowski's A-flat major etude, Opus 72, number 11. Thank you so much. And that was the Moszkowski A-flat major etude, from his Opus 72, number 11. And my fourth and final piece is Moszkowski's Valse. So if you didn't know, valse means waltz in French. And a waltz is basically a dance in 3/4 time. So you would kind of count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 throughout the piece. And they can be sad, or they can be happy, they can be slow, and they can be fast. But either way, it is a dance that you would count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2. And Moszkowski's Valse is from his Opus 34, number 1. And this waltz is in E major in 3/4 time, making it a waltz. So this valse was also the first piece from Moszkowski's 3 morceaux. So morceaux means parts in French. And this basically means that he published a set of pieces that are in 3 parts. And this valse, it was just one of the parts of the entire compilation. And this compilation was first published in 1884, dedicated to Theodor Ritter, a French composer. So unfortunately, because Moszkowski is not a very common or a commonly known composer, not a lot of people did digging on his life. So I wasn't really sure of what Theodor Ritter and Moszkowski's relation was. So I'm going to assume that they were best friends, or they had some friendly relation, because it wouldn't really make sense if you dedicate a beautiful piece to an enemy of yours. So that was just a little fun fact. And this valse was actually played by an orchestra in a ballet, making it a program music. And program music is designed to reflect imagery or stories. And these program music was very popular in the Romantic era, and it was often in ballets, which is shown in the valse, because this valse used to be played, or it didn't used to be, but it was played by an orchestra for a ballet. Unfortunately, I wasn't really sure what this piece was supposed to reflect as in the form of imagery, but I just know it is it does have a lot of various moods and dramatic contrasts and dichotomy throughout the piece. So maybe one section you would have a very slow and beautiful section, and maybe another section it would be just very fast and virtuosic, and it would be very, very showy. So that makes it a character piece. So a character piece is just a piece with a lot of different moods and contrasts and just different things scattered throughout the piece. And you can find that in Schumann and Chopin's longer works. So Schumann was just another fellow composer, and Chopin was another composer as well. So so an example of Chopin's work that is a character piece is his C# minor waltz. And he has 3 main sections. One section is the beginning, the melody, and the second section is kind of like a faster, with a different mood. And the third main section of Chopin's C# minor waltz is a very calm and maybe even sad section, and it also has a key change. So what I mean by the 3 sections is that there are 3 main sections in the piece, and they all greatly contrast each other. So I'm going to play an example of the 3 sections in Chopin's C# minor waltz, which sounds like this. So that was the first section. It was very nice, maybe even sad. And this is the second section, which completely is different from this first section that I just played. And the second section sounds like this. And so on. So as you can see, those sections sounded completely different. And the third section sounds even more different from the 2 sections. And the third section sounds like this. So as you can see, all of the 3 sections of Chopin's C# minor waltz sound completely different from each other. So in Moszkowski's waltz, you will find something similar to that as well. So you're going to find a lot of contrasting sections, just completely different. Sometimes you probably won't even know they're from the same piece. That's how different some of the sections are. And so he does this, Moszkowski does this by adding flourishes and arpeggios for the fast and virtuosic passages, and he has a lot of slow parts as well. So those fast virtuosic passages and the slow parts are very greatly contrasting with each other. And Moszkowski's moods also are contrasts. So some parts he has a very retrospective mood, so you're just thinking about the good old days, you're reflecting back on your memories. But there's other sections that sound very gracious, and there's another section that sounds very showy. So that was just an example of the contrasts in Moszkowski's waltz. So there are also very loud sections and very soft sections. And this piece, another fun fact about this is because it's a very long, or it's a relatively longer piece, it does combine some of the complexities and the elements and the techniques of his other works. So you will find maybe a bit of the A-flat major etude, which was the third piece that I played in the waltz. Or you might find the part of the Edensel's techniques in this waltz as well. So that was just an example of how a longer piece by Moszkowski really combines some of his common themes throughout his other pieces. So although this is a waltz, it is a dance. The beginning of Moszkowski's waltz doesn't really sound like a waltz. It's very ominous, and it's not something that you would want to dance to. So the beginning of this piece sounds like this. So as I've said before, that was not something that anyone would really want to dance to. It's not, although it is in a 3/4 time signature, it's not danceable to. I don't know anyone who would want to dance to that type of music. So that beginning is actually a prelude, an introduction to the actual waltz section, which sounds like this. So as you can see, that is a more cheery and something that you would actually want to dance to. So that is the main melody of this entire waltz, and he also repeats that melody throughout the entire piece, but with some modifications here and there, and you will find the repetition of that melody throughout his piece. And there's also a cadenza in the middle of the piece. So a cadenza is basically a section of a piece where the performer can just freely show off. And Moszkowski puts in a lot of arpeggios and scales and chromaticism to really show off the performer and be like, oh, look what the performer can do, right? And those were just some of my thoughts on Moszkowski's Valse in E major from his Opus 34 and number 1.
Yay! Well, you really pulled this together so well.
Thank you. Thank you.